When the US president threatens to double your trade costs, most countries listen. But this time, India didn't even blink. Not because it's trying to fight America, but because it doesn't need America's permission anymore. Trump called India a dead economy. He threatened to punish India if it kept buying Russian oil. And yet India didn't stop. Why? Because the old rules don't work anymore. And this time, the usual playbook failed completely. The threat that didn't work. In July 2025, Donald Trump made his move. He said any country buying Russian oil would face 100% taxes on their exports to America. Everyone knew he was talking about India. The message was clear. Stop buying Russian oil or pay the price. Here's what happened next. Nothing. India kept buying oil like nothing changed. No panic meetings, no emergency statements, no sudden policy changes. Indian officials quietly told reporters that their oil contracts would continue as planned. These are long-term deals, one official said. You can't just stop overnight. This wasn't just an answer. This was India saying, we make our own choices now. Let's go back to understand this better. Trump posted on his social media that India would face extra penalties for buying Russian weapons and oil. This isn't new for Trump. He loves using trade threats to make countries do what he wants. But this time was different. India just kept doing what it was already doing. Why? Because India isn't America's junior partner anymore. This isn't 2005. India doesn't ask Washington for permission before making big decisions. And here's the key part. It doesn't need to ask. The oil reality. Russia sells India over 35% of its oil needs. That's 1.75 million barrels every single day flowing into Indian refineries. This isn't just business. It's how 1.4 billion people keep their lights on and their economy running. Trump claimed he heard India would stop buying Russian oil. He was wrong. India's policy didn't change at all. Instead, Trump tried to change reality with his words. He said India would stop. India said nothing and kept buying. That's real power. The old world worked simply. America speaks, everyone listens. But the new world is like a chess game, and India isn't a small piece anymore. It's a major player with its own moves, its own partnerships, and most importantly, its own priorities. Why does India buy Russian oil? Because it's cheaper, because Russia offers discounts that Western countries don't match, and because cutting off Russian oil would hurt India's economy more than it would hurt Russia. When you run a country with over 1 billion people, you don't follow hashtags, you follow the math. This isn't about emotions, this is about economics, and that's what separates smart strategy from loud tweets. While Western capitals like Washington and Brussels talk about sanctions and moral lines, India focuses on feeding its people, powering its factories, and keeping its currency stable. It doesn't have the luxury of playing politics with energy. It plays the real game, and it plays it well. That's not weakness. That's being smart about what matters most. Why the pressure failed. Trump's 100% tax threat was meant to scare India. Instead, it showed something else. America can't just tell other countries what to do anymore. Not to India, not in 2025. India didn't fight back. It didn't escalate. It simply ignored the noise and stuck to its national interest. And that's worth paying attention to, because real power isn't about shouting louder. It's about staying calm when others scream. It's about choosing your path and walking it even when the spotlight gets hostile. India's oil policy is just one example of something much bigger, a story about independence, about strength, about becoming immune to pressure. India didn't pick a fight, it didn't wave flags, it didn't call press conferences, it just kept buying oil. And in that simple, quiet act, India proved something very loud. You can't control what's already free. The old world thought power meant control, but real power is being able to say no and still get respected. Let's be very clear about something. India didn't ignore Trump's threats because it wanted to make anyone angry. It didn't keep buying Russian oil to show off. It did so because it had no reason to stop and every reason to continue. India is the world's third largest oil importer. That's not just a number, that's a system. It means every single day, India needs over 4.5 million barrels of oil to keep its economy running. From powering homes and buses to fueling the military and the world's fastest growing tech sector, oil is like oxygen. And Russia offers it at a discount. No conditions, no lectures, just oil delivered. So let me ask you something. If you're running a billion-person economy and someone offers you cheaper energy, do you say yes or no? This isn't about politics. It's about basic math. India's smart strategy, even after the war in Ukraine started, when the West put heavy sanctions on Russia, India took a different path. It didn't join the sanctions, not because it supports war, but because it puts its own national interest first. And energy is national interest. When oil prices shot up globally in 2022 and 2023, Western countries scrambled. Europe went into energy crisis. Germany restarted coal plants. The US used its emergency reserves. India, it kept buying Russian oil, often paying in rupees or other currencies outside the Western banking system. Not as rebellion, but as a plan for independence. When others panicked, India planned. When others made speeches, India made deals. That's the difference. This is the same country that negotiated directly with Russia to make sure oil shipments could bypass Western sanctions. Critics in Washington might say, but you're funding Russia's war. That's a convenient talking point, but here's the truth. India isn't responsible for Europe's decisions. It's not India that built a system depending on Russian energy for decades. India is just buying oil on the global market like everyone else. And let's not forget, while the US tells countries to stop buying from Russia, it quietly imports Russian fertilizer, uranium, and other materials not under sanctions. Because when national interest matters, rules become flexible. India is just being honest about it. The new India, here's where people misunderstand what's happening. Trump thinks pressure will change minds, that taxes will break policy, that tweets will become truth. But India isn't moved by threats anymore. Why? Because it doesn't depend on the West the way it once did. In the past, India needed Western oil companies, Western military support, and Western approval. Today, it buys defense systems from Russia, signs trade deals with the UAE, and builds its own digital systems without needing Google or Apple to be in charge. India's foreign minister said it perfectly. We will do what is best for our country, and that should not be judged from someone else's perspective. That's not arrogance, that's independence. And when it comes to oil, India's view is simple. If the world wants us to stop buying Russian oil, offer us something better, cheaper, more reliable, with no strings attached. Because in 2025, words don't move oil barrels, discounts do. India has also made sure it doesn't depend on just one supplier. It's still buying from Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. It's not locked into Russia. It's just using its position well. This isn't about taking sides. This is about balance. A billion-person democracy needs affordable energy, consistent policy, and the freedom to make its own choices. And it's finally in a position where it can have all three. That's not rebellion, that's evolution. So when Trump warns and India shrugs, it's not disrespect. It's simply that the game has changed, the power has shifted, and the world is learning that India can no longer be told what to do. Not because it's trying to rise, but because it already has. The tariff threat reality. Let's talk about this 100% tax threat. Trump says if India keeps buying Russian oil, there will be penalties. He suggests hitting Indian exports, targeting trade, squeezing the economy until India gives in. This had worked in 1991, but this is 2025. India isn't a fragile, aid-dependent country anymore. It's the fifth largest economy in the world, soon to pass Germany. It's the second largest smartphone market, a tech hub, a defense player, a space power. It doesn't bend to pressure anymore. It absorbs it, thinks it through, and adapts. Let's break it down. First, the tax threat itself. Trump wants to put 100% duties on Indian exports if India doesn't fall in line. But here's the irony. India has been preparing for this moment for years, building trade routes with the UAE, Asia, Australia, and Africa. It's deepening ties with Latin America, Central Asia, and even Russia's Far East. So while Trump is drawing red lines, India is quietly drawing trade maps. More importantly, India has leverage. The U.S. needs India more than India needs the U.S. That's not talk, that's math. Think about it. In a world where China is increasingly hostile, Russia is under sanctions, and Europe is in decline, the U.S. cannot afford to push India away. It's America's only natural balance to China with scale, stability, and democracy. So if Washington pushes too hard, it's not just India that walks away, it's the entire Asia-Pacific strategy that falls apart. And let's not forget the trade numbers. India exported $77 billion worth of goods to the U.S. in 2024. Taxes would hurt, but they'd hurt American importers too. Everything from medicine to car parts to software services would get more expensive. And here's the kicker. U.S. companies from Apple to Google to Boeing are investing heavily in India's market and manufacturing. Taxes would hurt their own global operations. This isn't a one-way street anymore. This is mutual dependence. The dead economy myth, calling the world's fastest growing major economy dead, is like calling a rocket a horse. It's loud, but wrong. Donald Trump recently called India a dead economy. Let that sink in. A country with 1.4 billion people, the fastest GDP growth rate among major economies, a booming tech sector, and rising global influence is being called dead. It would be funny if it wasn't so desperate. Let's break it down with facts, not emotions. India's economy in 2024 crossed $3.9 trillion, making it the fifth largest in the world, right behind Germany, and expected to pass it soon. And while the U.S. and China deal with inflation, trade wars, and aging populations, India is growing at over 7% every year. If that's dead, then every global investor must be seeing things. Look at where the world is placing its bets. Apple is moving manufacturing to India. Tesla is negotiating factory deals. Google, Amazon, Microsoft, all expanding in India. Chip makers, space startups, solar tech companies pouring into the Indian market. Why? Because they're betting on size, stability, and skills, and India delivers all three. Compare that to Trump's story. He paints a picture where India is weak, dependent, and irrelevant, but that's not what the data shows. That's not what Wall Street believes. And it's definitely not what Washington's own defense experts believe when they call India essential to Asian stability. So why call it dead? Because Trump is playing to his supporters, not the balance sheet. It's a political line, not an economic truth. He wants to pressure India into dropping Russian oil. And to do that, he's trying to build a story. India is weak, India is dependent, so India should obey. But that world doesn't exist anymore. Strategic independence. Let's talk about something most people still don't fully understand. Strategic independence. This isn't a slogan. It's no headline. It's India's operating system. While countries scramble to pick sides, issue statements, and draw lines in the sand, India just moves forward with everyone and belongs to no one. That's not confusion. That's by design. India isn't trying to play both sides. It's building its own side. When the Russia-Ukraine war began, the world quickly split. You were either with NATO or with Moscow. There was no middle ground, except there was, and that was India. India didn't vote at the UN the way the West wanted. It didn't defend the invasion either. It called for peace. It called for talks. And then it did what most countries can't afford to do. It kept doing business with everyone because for India, foreign policy isn't theater. It's a calculation of national interest. That's where strategic independence comes in. It means India's decisions are India's alone. It doesn't need to explain them. It doesn't need to align them. It doesn't need anyone's permission. It's not anti-West. It's not pro-Russia. It's pro-India. India buys defense systems from Russia like the S-400 missiles. It also holds military exercises with the U.S. It trades with Iran, signs energy deals with the UAE, invests in Africa, builds railways in Southeast Asia, and launches satellites for European nations. No ideological test, no exclusive club membership, just interest-based engagement. And that's a problem not for India, but for those who still think global politics is a Cold War sequel. Power used to be about who had the biggest army, the loudest voice, or the most aircraft carriers. Now it's about who can say no and not be ignored. This isn't the first time India has faced outside pressure. In the 1970s, it was sanctioned for nuclear tests. In the 1990s, it was told to privatize or die. Even in the early 2000s, it was pushed toward alignment with promises of aid, weapons, and influence. But 2025 is different. This time, India didn't flinch. It didn't beg. It didn't apologize. It simply made its choices and stood by them. The biggest of those choices, keep buying oil from Russia despite U.S. threats. Why? Because India doesn't see itself as someone's helper anymore. It sees itself as a power center. That's what makes this moment historic. India is no longer trying to fit into someone else's system. It's building its own. Look around. The world order is shifting from one superpower to many power centers. The U.S. still has unmatched military power, no question. China is expanding its reach. Europe is managing decline. And in the middle of it all, India is playing a game very few understand: leverage. It's buying discounted Russian oil, but also hosting U.S. defense drills. It's part of BRICS, but also part of the Quad. It uses the dollar, but signs deals in rupees and dirhams. It joins Western summits, but never takes Western orders. This isn't fence sitting, this is chess. India is positioning itself as the balancer in a world of extremes. It's doing it without shouting, without threatening, and without breaking under pressure. Just look at how it handled Trump's latest tax threat. Old world reaction, panic. Lobby Washington, change course. India's reaction, silence. No outrage, no policy change, no compromise. Because India already knows the US can't afford to push it away. Not when it needs a balance to China, not when it needs a reliable tech partner, not with... And it's building supply chains away from Beijing. And here's the real twist. India doesn't need to win over the world anymore. The world is already coming to India. The new reality. History doesn't always announce itself with a bang. Sometimes it whispers. And if you listen closely, India just rewrote the script. The last few months, we've seen something fascinating. The U.S., through Donald Trump, issued direct threats. Stop buying oil from Russia or face penalties. Cut military deals with Moscow or lose favor. Play by our rules or pay a price. And India? India said nothing. It didn't make speeches. It didn't stage protests. It didn't call press conferences. It simply continued to buy oil on its terms. It continued to build defense ties on its conditions, and it continued to strengthen its global presence without asking anyone for permission. That silence wasn't weakness. That was independence. In a world obsessed with spectacle, India gave no soundbite. But in that silence, it said everything. We are not your project. We are your equal. That is the new global normal. The age of big powers dictating terms to the rest of the world is fading. Not overnight, not loudly, but steadily. And India, the once colonized, once overlooked nation, is now leading this quiet revolution, not through force, not through ideology, but through consistency, balance, and national interest. It's redefining what it means to be powerful, not by joining alliances blindly, but by evaluating every partnership, not by isolating itself, but by engaging on its own terms, not by shouting at podiums, but by building quietly at scale. This isn't defiance, this is design. The most strategic thing India ever did was not pick a side. It picked its people, its economy, its long-term energy security, its freedom to choose, and the results speak louder than any press release. Today, India builds fighter jets with one hand and trades oil with Russia with the other. Hosts U.S. aircraft carriers in the Indian Ocean while co-developing weapons with Moscow, leads the global south even as it courts investment from Silicon Valley, lands spacecraft on the moon, and still speaks for farmers back home. This is not contradiction. This is balance in a multipolar world. And here's the lesson for the rest of the world. Balance is the new power. Independence is the new alliance. Trump's threats didn't work, not because they weren't loud enough, but because they were based on an outdated assumption that India could still be moved like a chess piece. But 2025, India is playing a different game. It's not reacting, it's recalibrating, and everyone else is adjusting to that reality whether they admit it or not. The White House may not comment, the EU may issue sanctions, analysts may argue endlessly on news panels, but the oil still flows, the economy still grows, and the independence still stands. So here's the final truth. India doesn't need permission to rise anymore, and Trump or anyone else can't stop that path with a tax, a tweet, or a tantrum. This is a nation that's too large to ignore, too smart to manipulate, and too independent to be controlled. When the world finally realizes that it won't just respect India's independence, it will start learning from it. Because in the 21st century, the real superpower isn't who shouts the loudest. It's who stays calm, plays the long game, and never forgets who they are. And right now, that's India